or welcome back to my channel, Dark Enigmas, where we talk about the mysteries of life that are a little bit on the darker side. Today is a little bit of a lighter story. It's still about serial killers, it's still about true crime, but it's a little different, and so I wanted to start off by saying a couple things. First of all, the true crime community kind of is blowing up right now. You still have the Gabby Petito case. Brian Laundrie is still at large as of this recording, but Dog the Bounty Hunter is looking for him, so let's hope that someone finds something quickly in that case. I am just praying for her family. They are just such gracious people. Also, I am wearing my, you can see, Tiger King 2020 shirt because they announced a second season and so I'm excited for that. I personally have had the weirdest last couple of months. I got my wisdom teeth removed, which was like, okay, this is gonna be quick. And then I got a dry socket, which of course is horrible. And then I got an infection on top of that. So I've kind of been out of it a lot, but I'm fully back now, pretty much recovered and so ready to jump right back into making videos and talking about these interesting things. So today I have a interesting science-y, mystery, true crime kind of subject. It isn't a specific case, but it's talking about the correlation between brain injury or brain trauma and serial killers. And I'm very, very interested in this. I've watched and kind of took as much information as I could, and I'm so excited to deep dive into this. I watch a lot of true crime and listen to a lot of true crime. I love podcasts on true crime. I watch shows on true crime. My whole YouTube playlist is true crime. I absorb so much true crime. And I know a lot of people, as they listen, they start to see patterns in especially serial killers. And so this was extremely interesting for me to research because it's kind of the science behind the brain and what makes a serial killer. One of the most interesting videos I watched on this topic was a TED Talk, and it is by Dr. Kim Gorgans. She is a professor of psychology at the University of Denver. And her TED Talk was kind of about the revolving door in the criminal judicial system. It was super interesting. She does a lot of research behind the minds of criminals. And they had done kind of a study that said that 80% of men and 90% of women have, in the criminal justice system, have a big head injury, whether that be that they got before they went to prison or while they were in prison. And what she kind of saw was a correlation between the head trauma that they sustained in prison with repeat offenders. And she calls it the revolving door. She said that because of head trauma, a lot of times your memory is affected, your decision making is affected. And so if, let's say a person goes into the prison system, gets a large head injury, gets released, and says, okay, you have these court dates. She was finding that a lot of her people that she worked with wanted to go to those court dates. They showed up sometimes on the wrong days, but their memory was lapsing so much because of the head injury that they were just revolving back into the system. And I found that very, very, very interesting. The whole criminal system to me is very messed up. There's a lot wrong with our criminal justice system, and that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother video, that there's not really a reform for criminals, but like I said, whole nother video. But it was interesting to me that it was that high of a percentage. So you're seeing a lot of people who's had multiple or large head injuries committing crimes and recommitting crimes. And so that was interesting to me because it is a big statistic in the prison system. So when we're talking about head injuries for serial killers, criminals, people who have committed crimes, what we're looking at, so here's your skull. This is my decor. Da, 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 da. But here's your skull. So a lot of what we're seeing is the frontal lobe trauma. So this is children who have been hit over the head, who have fell. In sometimes cases, things have hit them in the head. And what we're seeing a pattern in is frontal lobe injuries. And what's interesting about that is when you look at the brain, the back part of your brain is where a lot of your breathing, your sleeping, your important functions for the body is at. When you come up to the frontal cortex, you have all your personality traits, your decision making, your impulse control, memory, anger, a lot of that comes from here. So it makes sense that a lot of criminals or serial killers have trauma to that front side of their brain. So let's look at some of the killers that have had brain trauma and what their crimes were. Now, these are extremely famous serial killers. If you don't know much about these people or these crimes, take a look into them, research them. If you're here, you love true crime. So if you don't know these serial killers, please look into them. So our first is Richard Ramirez, which I like to call Nasty Chops. Which, whole side note, why do women find this attractive? There was a whole subculture of women who liked Richard Ramirez. Like, really. And I don't get it. I mean, I get the whole bad boy persona. I don't get this. I don't get this at all. So this is Richard Nasty Chops Ramirez, or what his name is in the papers is Night Stalker. So he went into homes and killed people. He has a very big track record of killing. And at 2 years old, Richard Ramirez had a dresser fall on top of him and create a frontal head injury. This left him unconscious for at least 15 minutes, and he also got knocked out by a swing when he was younger, and those two combined injuries created seizures growing up. So he had a lot of frontal lobe trauma. Now, what's interesting is I don't think that just brain injuries make serial killers. I think there's a perfect storm of brain injury and trauma. So like with Richard Ramirez, he had all of these brain injuries in early life, and then he had trauma to back that up. He saw someone shot in front of him. And so having extensive trauma outside the body, then extensive trauma to your brain, makes a serial killer. I mean, not always, but in these big cases, it does. So, Gacy, no one's favorite clown, Gacy. Of course, serial killer killed young boys, buried them in his house. It was a whole thing. He, at age 11, was hit by a swing, and it caused a major blood clot, which, why were all these kiddos being hit in swings? I mean, I get it, but keep your kids away from swings, apparently. Oof. He also had that perfect storm, that mix of trauma with the verbal abuse. Gacy's father was very verbal abusive to him, and it kind of caused, again, a perfect storm of that frontal lobe trauma with outside trauma as well. Our next big prolific serial killer is, if you believe he did it, watch Netflix's Son of Sam. And who knows if he did it, but the person, David Berkowitz, had 2 major head traumas growing up. He was hit by a car, and he ran into a wall and cut his forehead. So if you believe that David Berkowitz did this, which he was a pretty awful person anyway, he also had the brain injury and, of course, trauma as well. So our next one is wonderful fashion designer Ed Gein, which, just use material. You don't have to use people's body parts. Ed Gein, of course, was a prolific serial killer and would use skin, body parts, whatever, to make things in his home. Ed Gein had been beat by his mother repeatedly. And had a lot of physical trauma as he was younger and he was growing up. And that, mixed with the trauma from his mother, created him to have a very weird relationship with women, and also with his mother. And you can kind of see, as his crimes go on, that there was definitely trauma from that. But also a head injury. Surprise, surprise. Our last serial killer, big serial killer that has had head trauma is good old Dennis Rader, or Sparky Big Time. Morbid fans, I hear you. I see you. Dennis Rader was also known as BTK. He terrorized the Wichita community, where I'm from around, for many, 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 many years. He had stated in one of his books that he had stopped breathing until he turned blue, and that his mother refused to take him to the doctor. Now, could that cause, frontal lobe damage? Of course. Low oxygen does horrible things to your brain. So this, mixed with also a lot of sexual trauma, caused this perfect storm that created BTK, or Dennis Rader. Now, as you can see with all of these serial killers that I mentioned, and also just a lot of criminals, there is a mix of nature versus nurture. Whatever you believe makes a person on that realm, or if you believe that there's a mix, you can see that a lot of these have both. A lot of serial killers, a lot of criminals have trauma in their background. And so if you mix that also with a brain injury, you're gonna get crazy. That's just, that child has no chance, no choice, so yeah. So what I think is hilarious is it feels like a lot of 60s and 70s kids grew up into 70s and 80s adults that were serial killers. We saw a lot of serial killers. So then I feel like in the 80s, 90s, we had this boom of like hover parents, where it was like, you can't make a move, which now created my generation, which sometimes is a little too hovered over and not allowed to make mistakes. And so no one knows what to do with our children. We can't fix everything. Nothing's going to be perfect. But it's an interesting evolution if you see kind of how that all evolved. So a lot of these serial killers have a mix of that brain injury and trauma. And what I think is interesting is when a child is growing up and they have a brain injury, I'm not saying that that's what makes a serial killer. I'm not saying that trauma plus a brain injury makes a serial killer. A lot of times it does, but it doesn't have to. There are plenty of normal people who have both, a combination, one or the other. But I think in a lot of these cases, these children saw extreme violence at a very young age. A lot of them were introduced to sexual violence at a young age, whether it be through rape, through sexual trauma to themselves or others, or it be pornographic material that was of more of a bondage style type, or threatening style type. Also, mental abuse can cause a lot in your brain, and of course physical abuse as well. So with a lot of these cases, they're coming from extreme trauma backgrounds, and some of that, like in the case of Ed Gein, beat by his mother, is causing a head injury as well. So both of those together is not a great combination. So are we getting close to figuring out what makes a serial killer? Are we getting close to figuring out how to stop criminals and serial killers? You decide. Let me know in the comments how you feel about today's video. Do you believe that head trauma has an effect on your personality, on if you're going to kill people or not? Also weigh in on nature versus nurture. How do you feel about having someone kind of have a more nurturing background with a head trauma? Yeah, leave me comments. I want to know what you guys think about today's video. This one was a little bit lighter. It wasn't necessarily aimed at a victim in particular. So I had a lot of fun researching it. I will be back with another video. Please leave me comments below what you'd like to see, and stay safe. Bubble wrap your children and keep them from trauma at all costs. All right, we'll see you guys later.